You are listening to the Marc Guzman Podcast Experience. Before we get started, just a reminder that you can find all of my available rental properties on my website at marcguzman.com. If you own investment property, click on the Owner Services section to see our complete list of services. This episode is sponsored by Lenny Clark with Prime Lending. Lenny Clark is a loan officer specializing in residential home lending. He communicates with you every step of the way, and his honesty sets him apart from the rest. He's able to think outside of the box due to his experience and is able to tailor a loan program to fit your needs. If you can't qualify just yet, not a problem. He will let you know what you need to do in order to be ready. Lanny is also backed by Prime Lending, which is one of the biggest and fastest growing lending banks in the nation. They have simplified the home lending process down to 5 steps. And FYI, step number 5 is to relax and enjoy your new home. So contact Lenny Clark today at 510-964-0620. For almost 20 years, the USS Hornet Museum in Alameda has stood as a monument to the U.S. Navy, the men who defend our nation, and the U.S. space program. But the Hornet's history goes far beyond its time as a museum. From battles at Iwo Jima and Okinawa to retrieving the Apollo 11 crew upon their return home, the Hornet has been one of the most historically significant ships in our nation's history. Today, we welcome to the podcast Captain Mike McCarron, formerly of the United States Navy, to talk about the Hornet's amazing past and how you can be a part of it for the price of an admission ticket. Well, Mike, thanks for coming on to the podcast.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming out from Alameda for this.
It's no problem at all. It's a quick drive.
Yeah. Now, do you live in Alameda?
No, actually, I live in Benicia, so I'm halfway home.
Oh,
already.
nice. Nice. I almost bought a house in Benicia. I love it there.
Yeah, it's a great town.
Yeah, I've got family that lives there, too.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking at Water's End.
That's a nice area, yeah.
Yeah, some newer homes. And, I remember, because I'm in real estate, I remember when the market crashed. It was crazy to see some of those homes selling for $400,000.
That's when I bought, so I was very fortunate.
Oh, good
buyer's
job.
Market, yeah.
Good job. Yeah, so you've got a lot of equity there. That was a smart move. Very smart. So you're with the U.S. Hornet in Alameda.
Right.
And I want to thank you for coming out. I think this is going to be a very fun episode to get into for a lot of the listeners and viewers. So let's just jump right into it. How long have you been with the USS Hornet?
I'm coming up my second anniversary. I started about a year ago this November. I was working part-time doing some public relations and communications work for them. I had retired. I'd spent most of my career at San Francisco International Airport in a variety of jobs. The last 10, I was head of public affairs for the airport. I retired from there in 2012, and I was doing some consulting work, some part-time work here and there. And I got working for the Hornet, and about a year into it, the executive director retired, and I expressed some interest in becoming executive director. Within about a week, the board of trustees named me interim director. And about 3 months later, I was named the executive director of the museum.
Okay. Now, how long have you been in the Navy?
I was in the Navy a total of 26 years, about 8 active, and then another 18 in the reserves. Most of that time out of Moffett Field. I flew an aircraft called P-3 Orion, which tracked and hunted submarines.
Tracked and hunted submarines?
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, that was our primary mission. It was called Anti-Submarine Warfare, or ASW. Flew out of Moffett on active duty from 1984 through 88, and then a reservist from 90 through about 99, 2000, around there. And it was a great job. I loved what I was doing.
So I know there's some aircrafts on display at the museum. Is that aircraft available there to see?
No, it's too big. It's a land-based aircraft. It wouldn't fit on the carrier. It's a 4-engine turboprop about the size of a 737, and we had a crew of 12 on a normal mission, so it was a big plane. In fact, it's been replaced. It's now being phased out of the Navy. I'm now a dinosaur. My plane's being no longer in the Navy. And it's been replaced with a 737 variant called the P-8 Poseidon. But we have other aircraft on the Hornet. Most of them that flew off the Hornet, or types that flew off the Hornet. A couple that didn't, but are nice to look at, like a F-14 and the S-3. All the other craft we have are Hornet area aircraft.
The F-14 Tomcat, growing up, so I have an uncle that's in the U.S. Air Force, and he worked on B-52 bombers for the longest time, but he was so addicted to planes, and so every time I was over at his house, he would be showing, he would build those plane models all the time, right? And he got me into building plane models, car models, different things. And one of my favorite at the time was the F-14.
Right. The F-14 Tomcat got a lot of notoriety because of Tom Cruise and Top Gun. That was the plane that Tom Cruise's character flew, the Tomcat with the Goose as his radar intercept officer in the back seat. And it's now been phased out and replaced with, of all things, a Hornet, the FA-18 Hornet, which now, since the ship's been decommissioned now for about 40 years, the Hornet name now still lives on the Navy as its top fighter aircraft right now.
Yeah, the F-14 was interesting because I loved how the wings would expand out and contract back.
Right, the swept wing had retractable wings. It was going subsonic or supersonic. They could move the wings around.
Yeah, and its counterpart was the F-15 that had the fixed wings, right?
Right, the F-15 Eagle's the Eagle. No, F-15 Falcon. F-16 is the Eagle on the Air Force side.
Mm-hmm. So those planes were fun to watch too. We go to the air shows and then just see them fly around, and the sounds they make were just amazing.
They are definitely noisy, and we always refer to that as the sound of freedom flying around.
Yeah. Now they have the F-35.
That's the new plane coming in. It's coming into service right now. Joint Strike Fighter. It's being tested by all services. The Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps will be flying it. So it's different variants for different services.
Now, hasn't that been in development for quite a few years, the F-35?
I believe it has, about 10 years altogether. It's just now coming to the fleet right now.
Mm-hmm. Recently passed, John McCain was I believe he was a big critic of the F-35, right?
Yeah, he thought it was a lot of overruns, and that happens, unfortunately, a lot of projects in the military. They are not as efficient as they probably could be in making these planes get through production.
Yeah. And the F-35, though, is pretty impressive to see, like, a lot of the tricks that it's able to do.
Right. It can. There's some short takeoff and landing capabilities. There's some stealth capabilities, so it's a little bit of everything in it.
Now, it doesn't take off by just going straight up in the air, right?
No, but it can do a very quick takeoff, though, on a short field.
Okay. Yeah, that's another plane that just lifts up.
It's a Harrier, yeah. The Harrier jet can be basically vertical takeoff and landing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how many planes are in service and have been designed for military service.
Right. There's a whole, depending on the type of mission, if it's an attack mission, a fighter mission. My plane I flew in, the P-3, was the patrol, anti-submarine warfare, long-range reconnaissance. So it just depends on what type of mission they're looking for, and they design the aircraft around it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know there's a lot of planes being decommissioned, and they're just cutting back on usage of these planes. Is it because technology has advanced in their outdated technology, or there's just not enough use for them?
It's mainly a technological issue. A lot of these aircraft are not designed 20, 30 years ago, and as the technology evolves and develops, they can find better ways to do things in smaller areas, and so aircraft adapt to that as well. Also, the type of mission they're designed for, as I said before, whether it's anti-submarine warfare, fighter attack, is it electronic jamming, electronic warfare. So all these things change, and the aircraft change with them.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were serving in the Navy, do they have you travel around the world quite a bit?
Yeah, I flew. In fact, I've actually literally flown around the world twice because of the Navy. Although I was stationed at Moffett Field, I would be there for 12 months, and then I would deploy overseas for 6 months. My first deployment was to Okinawa, and I'd come home for 12 months, and I'd go overseas again. And the second time I went to a little island in the Indian Ocean called Diego Garcia. And it's about 1,000 miles from the tip of India, 7.5 degrees south of the equator, and not a lot up there. But the Navy and the Air Force has some bases there, and the Marines. But and then I would be there for 6 months, and I'd operate out of the Indian Ocean. I'd come home for 12 months, and then the next time I went out to northern Japan, a place called Misawa, Japan. So yeah, it's always going around different operations. Even when I was in the reserves at Moffett Field, I would spend 1 week in a month at Moffett, and then 2 weeks a year, at least 2 weeks, usually more for me. I would go overseas to Japan or to Hawaii or down to the Caribbean and Puerto Rico or Panama and do operations out of there.
What were some of the biggest lessons you learned traveling the world?
The biggest thing is that I think travel is just great for learning that you're not alone in this, and that there are people around the world who want the same things you do. They want safety and security, and they want to raise their family. They want to have a nice life, and it's a great experience that I think everyone should have. If you can get out and travel and see different people and different cultures, You appreciate yours and where you're from and what you have a lot more. But I just love seeing the sights and meeting the people. I got to go when I was in Diego Garcia, this little island in the Indian Ocean. We were tasked by the State Department to go to Nairobi, Kenya. When we got there, the embassy there arranged for us to go on a photographic safari. I mean, I'm 26 years old at the time. I'm a kid in a candy store. This was so long ago. I actually shot film, so I went through rolls of film, about 3 or 4 rows of film, about 2 hours, because I shot everything that moved out on the safari. But to think that that's a once in a lifetime experience. Went to another little place called Mauritius, which is an island in the Indian Ocean. Absolutely drop dead gorgeous place, and had not been in the Navy, I never would have gone there. So just experience like that to enjoy and relish and to appreciate what we have here, to go see other places that are not as fortunate as the United States, and gives you much more appreciation of what you have here as an American citizen.
Yeah, and I like what you said about travel, in that you meet other people from different countries and you find out that they're very similar to you.
Yeah.
And they want the same thing, and you could really build a lot of really good relationships with other people just simply on the fact that we all want the same thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you just appreciate that they're no different. They want to raise a family. They want to have a nice, place to live and food on the table, and the safety and security that we have. And you break down a lot of barriers, and you get a lot of appreciation for that. We're all pretty much alike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing that I find amazing is how many bases the U.S. military has in a lot of these small islands.
Yeah.
And they're very crucial points. So my uncle was working on B-52 bombers and went on many different missions.
Probably did some time in Guam if he was in B-52s.
Yeah. And he was I'm not sure on the exact position, but I believe he was like the top navigator inside of the B-52. And he started off repairing the B-52 bombers, but when he could talk about certain locations he was going to, it was always an island off somewhere. And it's very interesting how these are very crucial spots for a U.S. strategy in missions.
Right. When I was flying, and this was on active duty in the 80s, early and mid 80s, there was a lot more bases than there are now. They've contracted over the years. As I said, I would go to Okinawa, which is a Japanese island about 800 miles south, about 800 miles, I'm guessing right now, south of the mainland of Japan. A huge air base there called Kadena Air Base that the U.S. Air Force operates. But there's also on the base some Marine Corps bases and air stations, but we operate out of the Air Force Base. It is as big, if not bigger, than any Air Force base you'd find in the United States. You find McDonald's, and you'll find a Chili's on the base, and you'll find a theater, and they had 3 chapels you could go to. So it's a huge American city, basically, on this Okinawan island. We would fly out of there into the Philippines. At that point, there was a huge air station called QB Point, which is right across from the naval station in Subic Bay. That's been shut down for many years, but that time was a large naval operation. And in Manila itself was Clark Air Base. So you're right, there are air stations and Air Force bases and naval stations around the world. As I said, I was in the Indian Ocean. If you go to the Mediterranean, you go to Rota, Spain, Naples in Italy. All these places have some type of U.S. base operating for both the Air Force and the Navy.
Mm-hmm. So what prompted you to join the military to begin with, and why the Navy?
Why? Really, because the kind of recruiting poster, kind of see the world. I grew up in Sacramento. I was in a suburb of Sacramento called Carmichael, beautiful downtown Carmichael, if you're familiar with Sacramento. And as a kid, I would read a National Geographic or a map and look at travel magazines. I wanted to go and see places. And this was an easy way for me to I won't say easy, but a sure way of doing it, get in the Navy. If you've ever seen the movie Officer and a Gentleman, there's a program called, at that time, it's now been discontinued, called Aviation Officer Candidate School, where after you graduate from college, you go to this program where you're trained by the Marine drill instructors for 16 weeks, and you come out as a junior officer, and then you start flight school. It was a very long 16 weeks to go through. People ask me the difference between real life and the movie. The movie lasted 2 hours, and I was there for 4 months, so it's a little more intense. But I graduated from Aviation Officer Candidate School in January of '83, was commissioned an ensign, and I started flight school about 4 or 5 months later in Pensacola, got my wings, and was assigned to Moffett Field. And I wanted to go and serve my country and then travel and see places. And that's kind of why I went in the Navy. I loved what I did. I was able to track submarines. Soviets at that time, the Soviet Union had a submarine fleet that was very important to be kept tabs on. They used to have submarines off the coast of California, and I used to track them and make sure we knew where they were.
Wow, the Russians had submarines off the coast of California.
About 1,000 miles off the coast of California.
Wow. And what were they doing there?
They were doing the same thing our submarines were doing off their coast. They were being a threat. They were ballistic missile submarines, just as we had theirs. We have ballistic missile submarines tracking around the world, and they are a deterrent. They are a force projection. So our job was to track and make sure we knew where they were at all times. And one of the things I loved about what I did tracking the submarines was that I was doing in peacetime what I would do in real World War time. And the only difference was I wasn't attacking the submarines; I was just tracking them.
Very interesting. So, what technology would you use to track these? In
the P3, as I said, we had a crew of 12. We would go out usually about 4 hours off the coast of California, about 1,000 miles or so, and we would drop what's called a sonobuoy, and it's about a cylinder about 6 inches in diameter and 3 feet long, and it would hit the water, and it'd break in two pieces. And the top half would float and had a little VHF antenna on it, and the bottom half would drop down to a predetermined depth that we'd base upon the acoustic predictions of the water based on temperature and pressure and some salinity and other things. And the hydrophone would drop down and listen for the noise the submarine would be making in the water. That hydrophone would pick up the noise and send it back up the wire to the little VHF transmitter, and we'd get the information in the plane. And if we get enough of them in the water and pointing in the right direction, we triangulate where that submarine was. And by the acoustic signature of that submarine, it was basically a fingerprint. We could identify the exact type of submarine it was. And if we had the right sonobuoys in, a very high-tech sonobuoy, we could even determine the hull number, because each submarine had its own little noise signature. Just like I used to tell kids when I talk about what I did, when Mom and Dad drive home, you could tell the difference of the car by the noise the car made. And each submarine had its own little unique noise it made, and we could identify it. It was a fingerprint, basically, and be very high-tech. And we would track them. And if we did our job right, they wouldn't know where we were up in the air tracking them. But we could be sloppy, too, and we could put noise. The aircraft's making noise, so we're putting noise in the water, too, and they could hear us if we weren't careful. So there was a cat-and-mouse game. We would practice on our own submarines off the coast of California near San Diego, and then we'd go out in the fleet, either in Japan or here in California, the Indian Ocean, and track the bad guys' submarines as well. And so that's
when you track these submarines and you determine, you fingerprinted them, what was the next step at that point?
The main thing was to maintain contact and know where they were, as we would put sonobuoys out in front of them, and then our computer on the plane would generate a little symbol that they were moving around, turning left and right, and just keep tracking. And then after 3 or 4 hours of tracking, hopefully a relief plane would come on and relieve us, and we'd turn over what we call contact, and we'd go back home and the other plane would track them. So it was a constant around-the-clock operation. And
24/7.
24/7, depending on the interest of the target. If we got enough information or people above my pay grade decided that was no longer of interest, we'd break off contact and go to another mission. So I flew out of a little island in the Aleutian Island called Adak, because there used to be transient submarines coming over from the Soviet Union or the Northern Pacific out of the Gulf of Alaska. So I spent a lot of time in this little rock of an island in the Aleutians called Adak. We flew out of there as well, too, tracking submarines.
Wow. Any scary moments when you were tracking where...
Tracking was actually the fun part. It was easy because once you got contact and you're keeping getting the information going. No, I can't say I had any really scary moments. Some bad weather we flew through that got, kind of bumpy and a little choppy. Every now and then an engine would conk out and you have to come in on 3 engines. But for the most part, the system worked as planned. The crews are great. We all worked together. We had 5 officers and 7 enlisted on the crew, 3 pilots, 2 flight officers, and these special sensor operators. Plus, we had a repair technician on board in case the gear broke down, which it did. It was planned too, so that's why we had called an IFT, an in-flight technician on board who could repair the computer or whatever system it was. I can't really remember anything that was like, oh my gosh, this is awful or frightening. As I said, occasionally we'd have to shut an engine down for maintenance reasons, but that's why you have 4 engines, so that you could fly on 2 or 3 if you needed to.
So
yeah.
I got questions. So
Sure.
not to create like alarm or anything,
Yeah.
but so the whole submarines off the coast of California, is that something that's still done today by both sides?
I can't really comment on that. The Soviet fleet has contracted a great deal. It's no longer the Soviets, the Russian fleet.
Yeah.
They don't have the capabilities, but we have plenty of capabilities, and that's all I can really say about that.
All right. Good for me.
It's part of the. There's a thing called the nuclear triad, which is the B-52 bombers that deliver nuclear cruise tip missiles. There's the silos in the Midwest that have the rockets in them, and there's the Navy submarines that have ballistic missiles in them, and that's the deterrent of what's called the nuclear triad to prevent anyone from attacking us. And the submarines are always moving, and so you never know where they are.
What's amazing to me is that type of surveillance that you were doing, tracking submarines, was a very small percentage of all the surveillance that you have to do.
Exactly.
And if you think about the technology that you guys had, I mean, it's just mind-boggling to think how big of an operation U.S. military really is.
Even, there's another thing that at the time we couldn't even discuss. This has now been all declassified. There are cables across the ocean with hydrophones on them, and we would get queuing data. Basically, there's a big box of water we want to look at because there's noise out there we can't identify, and it'd be a submarine, and we would localize it down till we could identify it as a submarine and then know exactly where it was. But it was called, at that time, it was a system called SOSA, Sound Underwater System. We couldn't even say that word publicly. It's now all been declassified, and it's now used for oceanographic research for tracking whales and stuff.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was one of the best targeting data we had to say, okay, we knew the submarine came out of port from satellite. It disappeared in the ocean someplace. And we now got this big blob of water out here where we're getting noise, but we don't know. We can't localize any more than several thousand square miles of water. And then that's where the P3s would come in and start. We'd have these huge patterns of buoys we'd put in until we localize it down until we know exactly where the target was. I
would imagine if satellite technology today has gotten good enough to detect submarines.
Well, they've always been able to if they're on the surface. If they're below the surface, there's not too much.
Not too much.
Yeah, there's some things they can do, but not if you get a couple hundred feet underwater, you're pretty well hidden.
Now, you moved up the ranks to captain. I mean, how long did that take you to move up to captain, and what was your motivation to keep moving up the ranks?
I was on active duty for 8 years, and I left to transfer to the reserves. And in the reserves, you're just basically in a parallel track. And so I was flying out as a reserve squadron out of Moffett Field. So instead of doing every day, I was doing 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year, as I said earlier. I stayed in because I was really enjoying what I was doing, and I enjoyed the challenge. I enjoyed the responsibility what I had. When I would take a crew out as the mission commander of the crew, it was a lot of fun, but it's a lot of responsibility. I remember one day, this is when the Iran-Contra hearings are going on, they mentioned a mission by its name that I had flown. And they was being debriefed for the president. I was like, well, someone actually reads my mission reports after after every mission you have to write a recap of what you did and who you tracked, and they used the coded word that I had flown. I was like, oh, so someone debriefed the president of my mission. That's pretty cool. But so I'm glad someone's reading my reports. But I liked what I was doing, and you stay long enough, and then I was looking at, well, if I stay at least 20 years, I'll get a pension out of it from the reserves. So it's kind of like a little financial security there. And so that's how I stayed. And by good luck and some, good work, hard work, I was able to get promoted every couple of years. So I went from ensign to lieutenant JG to lieutenant commander, and made commander. Then I guess around the 22-year mark, I got captain and pinned on the Eagles of a captain. So that was a nice little benefit. And one of the side things that's kind of was that our squadron was decommissioned. The Navy needed to come back and save money, so my flying days came to an end rather abruptly around 1998, 1999, and I got to fly desks the rest of my time in the Navy. But I had 2 commands, 2 units I commanded, which was fun. I was put on a task force at Coast Guard Island here in Alameda, working for a Coast Guard admiral on a joint task force on drug interdiction. So I was planning missions in Central America and the Caribbean. And that was interesting and fascinating work. So it was always something rewarding and enjoyable to do.
Now, speaking to my uncle being in the Air Force, the way he moved up the ranks, there were testing, additional education he had to take. Was it very similar, the same?
That's more for enlisted for officers. It's more on performance. It's all performance-based.
Okay.
And so and I was always looking for a challenging job, and that was good for my performance. And one of the things, as I said, that kind of helped me really make captain was that I got on this joint task force working for a Coast Guard admiral, oddly enough, because it showed that I had skills outside my normal set. And but for officers, it's all pretty much performance based. They like education, but that's not a requirement. On active duty, it's a little more. They'll send you to like the Naval War College or Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey here, but it's really a performance-based promotion review.
Okay, so now you've been with the USS Hornet Museum for 2 years now,
Right.
correct? And so, how did that come about as far as you joining the USS Hornet?
You know, it's kind of they needed someone to do some PR work for them, and that was my field. I was the head of public affairs at the airport for many years, so I had background in that. And I had actually a connection to the Hornet because when I was in the reserves, I drilled for 2 years on the Hornet, so I knew the ship. So I applied and I met with staff and told them what I thought was a good vision for how the Hornet should approach some public relations and communications work. They hired me. I was only working, part-time. It was a nice little gig. I was working a lot of days out of my house, so the commute was great. My first event I worked was the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor Day. Is that right? Or something like that. It was the Pearl Harbor anniversary. And I turned around. We got a lot of media coverage, and we did a good event and recognized some Pearl Harbor vets, and it worked well. And so that's kind of how I started working for them. And then, as I said, about less than a year into it, the executive director, my predecessor, decided to take another position and resigned. And I expressed interest that I think I want to run the ship. And so I put my hat in the ring, and the board of trustees met and said, yep, you're the guy we want. And I'm approaching my 1 year anniversary on that. It'll be the end of September. So right now I'm looking at taking care of this ship. This is an extremely historic ship. It's one of the most decorated ships in American naval history.
Now, how old is the ship?
The ship was commissioned in 1943. So this November, we're going to have our 75th anniversary of commissioning. It's also, by coincidence, the 20th anniversary of the museum. So we're having a big gala on November 3rd, a Diamond Jubilee and the 20th anniversary of the museum. We have the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra playing. We're having a big band dance. And come on down, fundraising. That's one of our big fundraisers. We are a nonprofit. We receive no funds from the Navy. We are completely self-sufficient. So anything you do and donate to us is completely tax deductible. But what we do is we now have a whole new mission, and that mission is to preserve the history of the ship and tell the stories and inspire new people to service to our country. We have a STEM education program where kids can come in and learn about how the ship works, how aircraft are launched off the carrier through the catapults, how they're recovered through the lines that go across the deck, and they snatch them with their hook as they come down. So that's a whole new mission and a whole new perspective.
How many pilots miss that the first time?
It is a trained thing. There's a lot of people who can't do it, and that they don't make it. I was a good friend of mine in the Navy when I was on shore duty back in New York. He was a surface warfare officer, but he started as a student naval aviator, and he could not land on the carrier at night, which is considered one of the hardest things to do in aviation. And he eventually had to wash out. He did not make his dream of becoming a Navy pilot.
Wow.
And so he became a surface warfare officer. It's a challenge to get that line with the hook, especially at night. You're looking at basically a little postage stamp in the water floating, bobbing, and weaving, and you're trying to put your jet on that.
So how do you train to land on an aircraft carrier?
First, you practice on the land. They have a short field, and then you go out, and then you have to do it. And, you have an instructor teaching you, telling you what to do, what to look for. And it's like anything in life. You have to go out and do it and prove that you can do it.
Wow.
So there's a lot of go-arounds. There's a lot of missed opportunities. And
I had a few friends growing up. They wanted to be fighter pilots.
Yeah.
One joined the Navy, but he couldn't be a fighter pilot because his eye vision wasn't the best.
Yeah. And so it's just it's a real skill. And basically you're coming at full throttle because if you miss, what's called a bolter, you got to go full throttle and go around and come back around and try again. And it's just it's not easy. And the guys who do it make it look easy. And ladies do it now. I have a very good friend who was she was my executive officer of the last unit I commanded. She was one of the first female carrier qual pilots. She delivered, it wasn't a fighter jet, but she a plane that was called a COD, and they delivered the mail and the packages and parts and stuff. It's a little 2-engine turboprop called a C2 Greyhound that she used to bring in and bring in packages and mail.
What year was that?
Peg was flying probably, she's a couple years junior than me, so probably like 87 through 90. And then after that, she went and did a really neat mission. She flew LC-130s, which are huge cargo planes, into Antarctica on the ice on skis. So she has a very interesting naval aviation career, and she's quite a remarkable woman. She's now a financial planner in the South Bay.
Wow. We'll have to talk to her, bring her on the podcast.
She is a remarkable woman. I'm a big fan of hers.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. So why are ships typically referred to as she?
There's a lot of theories on this. Some have are overtly sexual. There's the sleek lines and the waist and all these things. Others, there's a feeling that just about anything mechanically, or like your car, your plane, is often referred to as in a feminine sense. Another theory is that the ship at sea was like the womb; it protected you, and so she's taking care of us. And it was your mom, your womb you're going back to protect. So there's no really one idea, but that's always been kind of the theory, that this is a protective area like your mom would protect you. So you refer to it as she.
Interesting. So the museum, you're approaching 20 years now. This year or in 2019?
No, this year, the end of this year, end of well, no, I guess about October. So that's where we have the two celebrations
a couple months
together.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you're approaching 20 years now. On the website, it states you're a museum of sea, air, and space.
Right.
And I see that you also have is it a flight simulator or a space simulator?
It's a flight simulator.
Okay.
Like an F-18, you can go in there and be like on a mission on an F-18.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's more than just going to see a ship. You have you have exhibits, you have aircraft there, a lot of aircraft too. I want to say you have like 12 or 16?
Around there. I don't know the exact number offhand because we get some and others go out. We have a variety of aircraft that have flown off the carrier. We have a couple that didn't that fly off our carrier, but are carrier aircraft that were just newer than our carrier is. We have the space part is that we are uniquely tied to the Apollo program. The USS Hornet has the distinct, a unique advantage, or I should say, unique position of being recover the first two manned missions to the moon, Apollo 11 and Apollo 12. And we have, if you walk on the hangar deck, there are painted footprints where Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins, the first three astronauts on Apollo 11, walked off the helicopter into what's called a mobile quarantine facility. It's an old, it looks like an Airstream trailer because that's what it is if you're a RV guy. Because we didn't know if they had moon germs or not, so they wanted to quarantine for a few days, for a couple weeks until they could clear that they weren't contaminated. But those were their first steps back on planet Earth after being on the moon. And
so did they answer the question, because this is a big hot debate, is Earth flat or round?
I'm having flown around it twice. I'm fairly certain it's round. It's a sphere. It's definitely a sphere. So we have this unique connection to the Apollo program. Next July is the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 and Neil Armstrong's famous, one small step. So we're planning a big celebration. In fact, just before I came here, I was on the phone talking to a person about what events we're already starting the pipeline that we're going to plan to celebrate this 50th anniversary. I'm old enough to remember it. I remember sitting in my parents' living room in July of 1969, seeing that gray fluttering screaming image from the moon on my parents' TV, and Neil Armstrong coming out on the moon. That was remarkable, and I still find it remarkable today that we've had several missions to the moon and back. And
that would be amazing to watch today. So I can just imagine back then.
It was. You think of, we see mission shots from the space station as they fly overhead, and that's just orbiting the Earth. Mm-hmm. To see something for 250,000 miles away, two men walking on the surface of the moon, and it was remarkable. And I was kind of a space nerd as a kid. I wanted to be an astronaut. Unfortunately, I didn't have the math skills to be an astronaut. And I grew up in an area, as I said, I grew up in Sacramento. The suburbs of Sacramento there were some plants out there, McDonnell Douglas and Aerojet, which were key contractors for NASA and built many of the parts. So I had friends' dads who worked on the space program. They used to get us these 16 millimeter films we'd watch, at Little League meetings and stuff like that. And it was just, unbelievable, as a 8-9-year-old to watch these films and dream. To me, the astronauts were like ball players. I knew the astronauts in the space program as a kid, like Willie Mays or something like that. They were as big as to me as sports stars were. So I love that connection with the ship. It's unique. We are the largest artifact from the Apollo program, still intact, still in place right now. So people, if you want to come and see, where the footprints are, what it was like. But more than that, as you said, we are a ship, a naval ship. And so you can see how the enlisted men slept in these bunks, 36, 48 bunks in a room. where the junior officers slept, where the officers dined in the wardroom, and they have a galley set up. We have a lot of recreations that are very faithfully restored. Our team of I have a paid staff about 30 and about 200 volunteers. They do the most phenomenal work. You step back. This officer I told you about earlier, Peg, who flew on the carrier, I brought her on board a couple months ago, and she felt like she was being transported back 20 years ago when she was flying on the carrier. She goes, you really caught it. It looks like I feel right away like I'm back on the carrier.
Now, is the carrier itself pretty narrow, tight spaces, or is it pretty spacious inside?
Compared to other Navy ships, they would be very, very spacious, but it's not a cruise ship by any stretch of the imagination. It's a Navy ship. There are
didn't have a Macy's shop in there.
No, there's no spa, there's no massage place or anything like that. There's no grand ballroom. It's a Navy ship. The nicest place you could eat was the officer's wardroom. But it's comfortable in the fact that you and 3,000 of your closest friends are living on a ship. What I always point out about the Hornet when people come, they go, "Wow, this is huge, it's big," and it is the modern day carriers like the Reagan and the George Bush and the other ships that are out there right now. This is 2/3 the size of those ships. Those ships are enormous. We had 3,000. They have over 5,500 men and women on their ship.
Wow.
So and it's bigger, it's longer, it's heavier. But we have a chapel, we have a bakery, we have a tailor shop where you get your uniforms fixed. That's all been recreated to look like it did when 1960, 1970 when the ship was in service. And people can really step back in time. One of the great places we take people is the engine room, which is 3 or 4 decks below the main deck. You got to go down there and you got to be taken by a docent in small groups, about 10, 12 people. But you see these huge, long shafts that are connected to the propellers, or the screws as we call them. How the fuel came in, a very heavy fuel called, I just lost my train of thought there. But this heavy fuel is almost like a gelatinous thing that's vaporized and ignited, and it creates the engine, the heat to create the steam, to create the turbines to get everything running. And what's really amazing about this ship, as I said, was commissioned in 1943. It was built in 14 months at the height of World War II.
Wow.
And to think now the carriers take 8-10 years to be built because they're huge.
Where was it built?
Newport News in Virginia. But it was built by men, but a lot of women, a lot of Rosies on this ship built this ship. So it was your grandmothers and great-grandmothers and their sisters and their cousins built.
We had Rosie the Riveter Trust here on the podcast.
We had on July 3rd, we had a naturalization ceremony for about 76 new citizens, and I mentioned that. I said this was not just built by your grandfathers but it was built by your grandmothers and their sisters and your great aunts and stuff. This is a Rosie ship, but to turn out a ship this size in 14 months is nothing short of remarkable. In the 50s, it went into the yards and was reconfigured for jet aircraft, basically, to have an angled deck. And so they had some. It doesn't look like originally as it came out, but it's the integrity is there.
So it was commissioned in 1943, built in 14 months. Was it immediately used?
It was put right into service by the spring of '44. It was in the South Pacific in some of their major battles. The Marianas Turkey Shoot, which is one of the major air battles in the Pacific.
So it was a battleship first before an air carrier.
Well, it carried aircraft forward these battles.
Okay.
And it wasn't a battleship. It's always been an aircraft carrier, but it was in major battles throughout the Pacific Fleet during World War II. It was instrumental in the sinking a huge battleship, a Japanese battleship called Yamato, and as I said, if you go in there, we have all the battle ribbons on the side of the bulkhead there, and it is really a remarkably decorated ship. It's the 8th USS Hornet. It's the last USS Hornet. They haven't commissioned a new one since then, but it's a special place to be.
How long would the Navy officers be out at sea?
During wartime, they would be out for months at sea, and they'd come into port for replenishment. Basically, that'd be it. But during peacetime, a normal carrier like now goes out anywhere from a 6 to 9 month deployment, and they come back in port and for training, and they're in port for maybe 8 to 12 months. But during the wartime, they were out there for as long as they needed to be. Because until the war was over, you're out there doing what you need to do.
Mm-hmm. And so you said in the 50s it was remodeled.
Right. It was reconfigured. When it was built, it had a straight deck. Just landed at one end, and it just went all the way through. they redesigned it called an angle deck, where there's kind of a V shape to the top deck with the aircraft, and one is for takeoff and one's for landing, basically on this V. And it's a lot more efficient, safer, a better operation, and it was also configured for jet aircraft because they put the catapults in and some other things to help them take off, and then the wires for the landing hooks and everything else. So this is a whole reconfiguration. So it didn't see any service during the Korean War, but following in the 50s, it saw significant service in Vietnam, off the coast of Vietnam. So there was a lot of action for the Hornet then.
At what year was it decommissioned?
It was decommissioned about 1970. It was supposed to go to the scrap heap and be cut up and salvaged. But a little over 20 years ago, they were getting ready to decommission the Naval Air Station at Alameda, and the CO of the base saw the Hornet across the bay in San Francisco getting ready to cut up and said, it'd be great to have it come over here and just for some photos for our decommissioning ceremony. As it came over, a bunch of people got there and said, we need to save this as a museum, as a landmark. And that's how it got saved, and now it's been there ever since.
Wow, that's really, really neat. Yeah, it's amazing history. So, and I didn't know about the how he was involved with the space program,
right?
With the
two
missions. You said Apollo 11 and 12?
11 and 12, the first two manned missions to the moon. There were other carriers were involved in Vietnam, and this carrier was free to be used, and it was in the right place at the right time. And so they had crews recover the capsule and the crew and the astronauts themselves. So that was July and I think October or November of '69, and so those are unique positions, and it is a unique, as I said, it's uniquely tied to the Apollo program and the space program, and we're really looking forward to that 50th anniversary next year and celebrating that. We're hoping to get some astronauts here to celebrate. It's kind of dicey right now because they'll probably be in Washington, D.C. or at the Smithsonian, someplace like that, but we're trying to get some folks here.
It's going to be interesting, the new Space Force that they're developing.
It kind of remains seen how that's going to work out. There's still some questions whether that's actually going to happen because it still has to be funded and what the mission is going to be. But and there's some treaties also that kind of prevent you from militarizing space. So that's another issue that's got to be determined.
Oh, there's treaties that prevent that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's going to be okay. Yeah, so it's going to be very.
There's a lot of things to work. There are a lot of details to work out before that becomes a reality.
Yeah, because I know NASA announced it along with SpaceX, along with the European Space Agency, that they all want to send a small little colony up to Mars.
Right. That's the next big push is to get people to Mars. And in fact, there's a spaceship being built right now called the Orion, which I love the name because that's the name of the plane I used to fly. But it's now going to be a spaceship, and it's going to replace what the Apollo program was with the capsule. And it's for long-range interplanetary space travel. And they're doing testing on it right now. They've done some ballistic work on it as far as launching it and recovering it. And that will be the new manned space travel program. And hopefully it'll go to Mars sometime in the early 2020, 2024, somewhere around there, or something like that. And
it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's a long trip. That's looking
6 months, right?
Yeah, minimum 6 months.
And that's 6 months because of when the planet.
You got to line them up. That's one way. Then you got to run and come back.
Yeah. So I read somewhere where it's every 2 years you can travel back and forth, and it's a 6 month travel.
Right.
Yeah. Crazy. So let's talk more about the museum.
Sure.
What other exhibits do you have there? Well, how's a flight simulator? Because I've never been in one.
Flight simulator is wonderful. You get in there and there's different missions you can ask for, but it basically gives you a feeling of being an F-18, which is a Navy fighter jet. And it's motion. It gives you left and right, you pitch and roll, yaw and everything. So you get yanked around a little bit. And people love it. It's one of our more popular things. As far as other exhibits, we have, let me just start, the wardroom, which is where the officers dined. That's kind of recreated the way it was in the 1970s. We have a chapel, which doubled during the week as a library. So on Sundays, they'd have services in there. And then during the week, it'd be the ship's library. What's great about the chapel is last year we had a guy trying to get Eagle Scout, a young man, and we found some old photos of the chapel because we didn't have any pews in there that had the pews in there. He built us pews as an Eagle Scout project, and these are absolutely beautiful. He did a terrific job. And so now we have pews like they did in the chapel during the 60s and 70s. So that's awesome. Real great thing. We have a full medical clinic because this was the largest ship in the battle group, so injuries, people injured either in air fights or battle, warfighting at the sea would be transferred to the ship, and there are surgical theaters where you do operations. There's a sick bay where you recover. There's a quarantine area that if you had an infectious disease, they'd put you into so you wouldn't spread to the rest of the ship. So there's a dental clinic. There's where you get your eyes checked for optometry. All these things just you'd find in a regular hospital, we have a miniature version on the ship. We have exhibits that dedicate the Hornet is one of what's called an Essex class carrier. The Essex was the first one, and there were 23 others, 24 ships altogether in the Essex class, and the Hornet was one of those. We have an exhibit dedicated to all the other Essex class carriers, on what they did and how they ended up and what their moral and history was. We have staterooms that are built up so they look like if a junior officer, this is what a junior officer stateroom would look like. We have where the enlisted men slept in their galley, their mess hall, where they would get their food. So all these things are recreated. We have a recreation room. If you were going into port and you wanted to go play golf, you could rent a set of golf clubs from a guy. There was a person on the ship who would do that out for you. Or you want to go play basketball.
Golf balls off the deck?
Yeah, do that. Or you want to go play basketball or something, you check out a basketball. So it was a recreation thing. Is at the bakery where they made bread every day because you have to have bread to feed the sailors. All the galleys, we have the chief's mess, the chief petty officers were the supervisors enlisted men, and they had their own galley and their own mess area where they dined in their own lounge area. So all these things are recreated.
I would imagine there had to be some giant freezers to take a lot
We got
of food.
huge refrigerators. We've got huge galleys and kitchens. And then you got a huge garbage disposal because you got to grind everything up and ship it overboard. We have huge laundries where the uniforms and everything's washed. The sheets, everything has to be laundered every day. So all these things were. It's a floating city, and we have all the things that would make that floating city work.
Wow, that's amazing.
Plus, you go up on the deck. You have basically what's called primary flight, which is basically the tower for the ship to control the aircraft. We have a place called CIC, Combat Information Center, which is like the brain, the nerve center of the battle group. So you have all these radar scopes and charts on the wall and mobilization boards. And so all this information is coming in. And so the battle group commander is sitting there looking at where's he want to launch his attack? Where's the threat? And he has to determine all this information that's coming into this one little room.
Wow. Now, right now you're located in Alameda, but is there a chance it could get moved somewhere else?
Right now we are in Alameda. We have looked at other options because the base is now going through a big redevelopment. They just started some projects on there. There's no immediate plans, but we have looked at other options. One of the problems is it costs money to move that, and I don't have the money to do that. But certainly we have looked at other options, but nothing's come up that we can say, yeah, we're going to move there right now or anything like that.
Well, how would you move the ship if you did?
It would have to be towed. It would have to be towed. The engines don't work anymore. There's no internal power, so we'd have to get a lot of tugboats and tow us around wherever we want to go.
Wow. Now, you have overnight programs at the museum too, right?
Yeah, that's one of our most popular things. We have just about every weekend of the year, we have anywhere from 50 to a couple hundred young boys and girls spend the night on the ship. They live in the bunks, they dine in the galley, we get them food, and we tell them the experience of being on the ship and what it was like to be a sailor at this time. And I've had more people when they find out I work at the Hornet, oh, my kid, when he was a Boy Scout, did an overnight. He loved it. And the dads or moms who spend the night, they loved it too. And so it's really come and evolved and grown. And Jenya, who runs that program for us, is just done a remarkable job growing it and making it better. And they love being on that ship. It's really a great experience.
How much does that program cost?
Depends on the size of your group. It's around $70 or $80 a person, and that includes a meal, an evening meal, a morning meal, and tours on the ship, and it varies from program to program.
That's a great price for that experience.
It really is. And then if you want to we have more educational focus programs, so we do more STEM training or more focus training. So there's a variety of things you can do there.
Do people see ghosts at night?
There have been people who said that they have seen ghosts or been affected by that. I haven't. I'm not a believer in that. But if kind of look at religion, if that's what you believe in, that's your choice. That's fine. But
you haven't had people who show up and try to do a seance overnight? We
haven't had seances, but we had people who want to come look for the ghosts, and that's not an uncommon occurrence, and that's fine if that's what they want to do. It's one of the
should let the people from Ghost Hunters come by.
Well, they've actually been on board.
Have they?
They have been on board. They've done shows from there. And apparently, and once again, if you believe this, the most haunted place on the ship is the sick bay, because some people went in but didn't come home from there.
Those shows crack me up because there's never any ghosts, but they're always yelling. getting scared.
So, but there are people who firmly believe the ship is haunted.
So remind us again the event coming up for the 20th anniversary.
Sure. On November 3rd, it's a Saturday night. It's our 70th anniversary as a commissioned ship and 20th anniversary as a museum. We have a big band dance gala. There's a variety of ticket sales as far as you want a VIP, you want a table, you want reserved seating, you just want to come and dance.
And can people buy tickets online?
You can buy them online through Eventbrite or through our website. You can buy a whole table if you want. And if you got a group of friends coming, much to my surprise, some friends of mine from high school bought a whole table. They put it in together. So I was very happy to see that. And
how much are the tickets?
They vary in price depending on VIP. Anywhere from $65 is just for general admission, all the way up to, I want to say, $125 for the VIP, where you get table and food and the whole bit. So it depends on what you want to do. Primary seating right by the band. And all the benefits, all the money proceeds go to the ship and the Heritage Foundation that keeps the ship alive. And that's just one of our many events, because that's one event in November, but also in October we have our Monsters Bash, which is a Halloween party. You get dressed up. We have costume contests. We have a zombie crawl, for lack of a better term, through some of the more difficult areas of the ship to navigate, and see if we can scare you a little bit. That's in October. That's the last Saturday of October. And then we have a huge New Year's Eve dance every year. And another big band dance. We usually get about 1,000 people on board for that. And what's really fun is at midnight you go up on the flight deck and you watch the fires from around the bay, out from the flight deck of the USS Hornet.
Very cool. Okay, so we'll make sure to link up the website and all the details on the podcast description. I want to thank you for coming out and doing this podcast. A lot of really great, interesting information. And again, thank you for your service too in the military.
It was an honor and privilege for me to serve, and I mean that sincerely.
Yeah, thank you. And so, again, good luck to the museum and everything going on here in the future. And I'll be signing up for one of these events coming up.
Please do.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Bring your friends. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
For sure.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lubin. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at marcguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.